It all comes down in the end, in terms of these society-controlling institutions, to what I call the global cult, which is a global network of secret societies and semi-secret groups with ultimately, if you go deep enough in the rabbit hole, a mission control, a central organizational center. This explains why countries tend to respond to the same kind of situations in extraordinarily the same way. The thing is, if you're talking about control and the need to control, then you look at society as it's structured, and control is overwhelmingly dictated by money. Who has it and who doesn't? And if you look at a definition of freedom, well, it's choice. The more choices you can make, the freer you are. The fewer choices you can make, the less free you are. And in the way that society is structured today, what dictates choice more than anything than money? We have a human race that has conceded its right to control its own perception. And because perception leads to behavior, giving up perception has led to behavior that has allowed a very few people to impose their will upon billions and turn this planet into basically a mind prison. If you want to control people, you have to create a mind prison. Authority says this is how things are, and someone who has given away their right to form their own perceptions then accepts what authority tells them is true and reacts, behaves on the basis of that. Whereas those who are awakening, they have a process. They look at information from different sources of information and evidence, and they process that information into their own unique conclusion. Everything we do, everything we don't do, everything we allow ourselves to acquiesce to, everything that we resist acquiescing to, these are all expressions of a person's perception. And the difference between those that have conceded their uniqueness, their right to freedom, they are people who have conceded their right to reach their own conclusions. Because the conclusion for those people comes not at the end of the process, it comes at the start.
If anyone's not allowed to speak, then it's not freedom of speech, it's freedom to conform to certain parameters of what are acceptable. And then what that's doing is giving power to some authority to decide what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And as we see, and we're seeing it massively now, once you give that power to an authority, it then starts interpreting what can and cannot be said in a way that squeezes and squeezes and squeezes more and more of what cannot be said. This is what political correctness is about. What is political correctness? It's simply manipulating the target population to silence itself, so those in authority don't have to. It's ridiculous.
You've got to be very careful. If any organization or group comes forward and says, you don't have to worry about it, it's all in hand, then you need to be very, very wary of those people. Because, I've been doing this a very long time, and I've seen these groups under different names come and go and say, look, there's a plan, don't worry about it, it's all going to be sorted. Well, it's not going to be sorted unless we sort it. And we have a mathematical dynamic here that shows where the power is. The few can't control the many unless the many acquiesce to the power of the few. And in doing so, give the power of the many to the few in the form of acquiescence. You need to be very, very streetwise about how this works. It all comes down in the end, in terms of these society-controlling institutions, to what I call the global cult, which is a global network of secret societies and semi-secret groups with ultimately, if you go deep enough in the rabbit hole, a mission control, a central organizational center. This explains why countries tend to respond to the same kind of situations in extraordinarily the same way. This cult wants to control all sides so that it can dictate the outcome before the process starts. So if you had a football game, it would want to control both sides and the referee so that you know the score before the game started. This cult and its agents and operatives are very, very insecure because they know that if enough people wake up to it and stop cooperating with it, well, their game's over because they just don't have the numbers. The thing is, if you're talking about control and the need to control, then you look at society as it's structured, and control is overwhelmingly dictated by money. Who has it and who doesn't? And if you look at a definition of freedom, well, it's choice. The more choices you can make, the freer you are. The fewer choices you can make, the less free you are. And in the way that society is structured today, what dictates choice more than anything than money? The bottom line of bottom lines is not about accumulation of money. It's accumulation of control via the weapon of money.
We, the powerless people, are holding the powerful people up there, and they know that. They're terrified of us realizing that. And that's why this network of manipulation works so hard to keep us in these states. No longer will we just do it because we're told to do it. Is it just? Is it right? Okay, I'll do it. Is it unjust? Is it not right? I ain't doing it. We start to make the decisions on what we will and will not do based on our values and not some imposition from the dark suits. The big question, what would consciousness do? What would consciousness do in this situation? And when we ask that question, it really just changed the way we see the world. Not what would I do, mind, frightened. What would consciousness do? You know, this is a great line. If it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it. And what would transform this world overnight is if we started doing what we knew to be right in the situations we face, instead of what we think is right for us in the moment. What is right? What is just in this situation? If we started making decisions based on that, the world would transform overnight.
We're now in the midst of a real big advance of that towards the end game, which is a global centralized dystopian dictatorship. It is like a sci-fi movie. Why? Because sci-fi has also, for whatever reason, predicted much of this dystopian technology that's now unfolding. So I'm sure that didn't all come from the imagination either.